Hey everyone, welcome to Hit the Apex podcast. It's Jawad here as always, and thank you for tuning in this week. It's after the second round of the championship in Formula One. Got the Newcastle 500 talking points from the Supercars Championship as well. And yes, it's a bit later than I would normally do, but it's been a pretty busy week. And yeah, this weekend we've got a bit of a rest from racing ahead of next week, which is going to be huge because it's the Australian Grand Prix. It's our home round here on this side of the world. Really excited to be there again and covering some F1 for the Raw.com, the website that I write for. So I'm sure to bring you plenty of pictures and also content on that website. So stay tuned. But Saudi, yeah. Again, not a race that I'm not a particularly big fan of. I don't like the circuit. I don't like this emphasis on, we need the fastest street circuit in the world. Like, no, thanks. I kind of find it too complex and not very exciting compared to, a purpose-built track like a Portimao or, even Kyalami, which is not even which didn't make it on the calendar this year for various reasons. But it was an intriguing race. There was a lot to take away from it. Particularly for Red Bull, who, despite finishing 1-2 again, there was a lot of issues that, have been raised as a result of it, particularly internally with Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez again, whether it's going to hit that same sort of boiling point as it did last year in Brazil, it remains to be seen, but I've also put pen to paper or, finger to keyboard in talking about it and whatnot, so keep an eye out for that later on, probably early next week sometime. But the street specialist Sergio Perez does it again. It's redemption for him in a way from last year where that, ill-timed safety car kind of cost him the win. He did a good job. He was on pole position. But the argument can be made that his success this weekend was down to the fact that Max Verstappen, who was fastest in all three practice sessions quite comfortably, had a drive shaft, problem or drive shaft failure in Q2, and that caused him to, not even progress through to Q3, not even vie for pole position, and ended up 15th on the grid. And you had Charles Leclerc as well, who took a grid penalty over the weekend because they gave him a new control electronics unit. And sorry, I'm just being distracted here by little Lulu sitting on my lap, licking the microphone. So if you hear any weird noises, now she's trying to get on the table. This is real funny. Lulu, why are we doing this, huh? You little clingy little dog. It's also because my partner's not home today, so she is very much a mother's girl. So she's being extra clingy now that I'm sitting here in the office and recording the show for you. But yeah, the fact that Max didn't make it through to Q3, didn't get on pole and, do his usual thing, gave Checo the rare opportunity to actually, showcase the fact that he can take pole positions and then go on to win the race. Now, Fernando Alonso, who ended up second in qualifying as a result of the Leclerc penalty, was able to lead the opening stages of the race, got the better start off the front row of the grid. Checo, though, got back into the lead by lap 4. Max, meanwhile, was into the top 10 after the first 8 laps. But the big controversy there was around a 5-second penalty being handed to Alonso for being out of grid position, or like he was just either to the left of his box or too far to the right, something or other, nothing to be gained an advantage from. It was like Esteban Ocon's penalty in Bahrain, if you remember, and rather comically as well, and probably not comically, not funny with what ensued afterwards. A further penalty was given to Alonso for the fact that his 5-second penalty was not served correctly. So I'll get to that a bit later. There's a lot to unpack and discuss from that. But going back to the race, so you had Alonso leading, and then Perez took back the lead. Leclerc making early inroads as well, like Verstappen, but Leclerc's on the soft tyre. Stroll got past Carlos Sainz at the start, and after the pit stop, which Stroll first triggered, as a result of, I think, Ferrari trying to dummy them. There was an energy recovery issue on that Aston Martin, so the safety car was brought out on lap 18. And that was kind of strange because Stroll was far enough out of the way, I thought, that they didn't have to bring the safety car out. And I think even Martin Brundle said it in the commentary that they didn't really need to bring out the safety car. There was no debris. He was comfortably off the track as well and in the recovery area. But hey, it's not like they were trying to do a Singapore 2008, were they? Or 09, I can't even remember. Anyway, I remember it being brought up at one point over the weekend. But yeah, this allowed much of the field that hadn't pitted already to pit. Checo as well was safe instead of getting done over like he did last year because Alonso had the penalty to serve, the 5 seconds. It greatly benefited Max's race because he was up into P4 as a result, and of course he was able to then get past the likes of George Russell and Fernando Alonso to be in P2. And it was funny because Alonso predicted pre-race that he reckons Max will be up to P2 if he's leading by lap 25, and indeed it was by lap 25 that he overtook Alonso for P2, so that was quite funny. But drama at the end of the race on the Red Bull side because Perez was told to manage his pace. Max was faster, so Perez was told something like, you need to be doing 33 zeros, yet Max was comfortably going quite quicker, a tenth of a second per lap, and the finishing margin was still 5.3 seconds between Perez and Verstappen. But I guess when you're Perez and, you've gone through what you have with Brazil last year where Max pretty much defied team orders to swap 4th and 5th to let Perez get more points to try and get second in the championship, there's going to be an element of paranoia. I mean, this is the lion's den you're dealing with, and Max is very much the Lion King here. Max as well at that point told to, manage as well by his engineer, Gianpiero Lambiase, but he was demanding the fastest lap information, which at the time Perez still had the fastest lap in hand, and anyone who's followed Formula One in recent times knows you get an extra championship point if you're in the top 10 and get the fastest lap. So Max was like, it concerns me. He obviously cannot stand the fact that he won't be first in the championship. I mean, let's be frank here. Let's be frank here, people. I don't think that, if you want to have a 2016 style Rosberg v Hamilton kind of season, as much as I love Checo and I think he's a great driver, he's never going to be up there with the very greats. And, it's great that we can see him winning races and whatnot and contributing to Constructors' World Championships. But the fact of the matter is, the kind of team that Red Bull is, and, this is the 10th anniversary, mind you, as well, that was pointed out recently of Multi-21, going back to 2013, and I remember it like it was yesterday, the tension you can cut through like a knife through butter, basically. Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber, and Vettel pretty much ignoring team orders to still go on and win the race ahead of Webber. And yeah, I don't think that Checo has the mental capacity, I guess, to go to the end of the season toe-to-toe with Verstappen. So I don't know why Max is kind of wasting his time, with little things like that. I mean, he should easily just, okay, cool, I lost the championship lead by a couple of points here, but I'm going to get back the next race, because this race was riddled with, or this, whole event since qualifying was riddled with dramas for him, with the drive shaft thing. And for him to then come out after the race as well, and this is, this is where I'm like, okay, you are a bit of a prat sometimes. Sorry, Max. You're a great driver. You are one of the very greats. You're up there in terms of your ruthlessness, with the likes of Michael Schumacher, Ayrton Senna, Lewis Hamilton as well, Sebastian Vettel. You are one of those really good really, really good, great drivers. Okay, but this sometimes you have to think about the bigger picture, and the fact that it concerns me that I need to be ahead in the championship by a point even now is like, okay, you guys are easily most comfortably the best team this season, and I don't think you're going to lose a championship even if you get stuck with that aerodynamic testing restriction penalty later on in the season, and will allow other people to catch up potentially. But Max is just going to walk to the title. So, the unhappy demeanour that came out afterwards, and, the egregious look on Jos Verstappen's face as well was just kind of like, you guys are just absolutely appalling sometimes. You not very gracious in victory. I don't want to see what you're like in defeat, potentially. Or this is what we saw in defeat. This is how gracious they are. So, this is in no way a personal attack on Verstappen the driver, but Verstappen the character, it's a bit questionable in my eyes, and I have no shame in saying that too. So, it's not like my favourite driver's up there winning or anything like that, so you can't come after me in any respect. Yeah, I dare you, Twitter. But yeah, unhappy demeanour, and then also after the race there was also a deleted tweet from Checo saying that he wants to be world champion or whatever, but then it was deleted, most likely got the gag order from the Red Bull media team and whatnot, saying, or the PR team saying, you can't really, don't say that, just put everything else back up, but minus the world champion part. And that's the thing that's most sad. I'm thinking here from Checo's perspective. I'm in F1. I've been in F1 for a long time, and I finally have a car underneath me that is capable of winning the world championship. And that's anyone's dream, is to win the world championship if they're in F1. But when you've got Max Verstappen as your teammate, that's not going to happen, particularly in an environment such as Red Bull, where, as we've seen in the past with the likes of Webber and Vettel, and then even Ricciardo I guess Ricciardo and Verstappen weren't really fighting for the championship, but yeah, Webber and Vettel, 2013, they put all their eggs into one basket, and you're basically the number 2 driver in that respect. And, part of me does say, look, Checo, you need to be grateful the fact that you're in this position anyway. You got the lifeline from Red Bull at the end of 2020, when you were out of Racing Point, who were going to become Aston Martin. So yeah, more race wins to your career, more pole positions. That's going to be it. And those who want to come and say, but Daniel would probably, take it to Max. I'm like, no, that wouldn't have happened. And Daniel had the opportunity to stay with Red Bull and be in the position Checo's in, as far as adding more race wins to his tally, getting those Constructors' Championship wins. But when you've got a force like Verstappen, and we've got so much history, F1 history to go off, to know that, if you want to have a team where both your teammates are going to fight for the championship, like we saw with Rosberg and Hamilton, or Senna and Prost and whatnot, it's not going to end well. And, Mercedes themselves were happy after 2016 when Rosberg left that that they were able to find a bit of harmony in the team with Hamilton and Bottas. So yeah, it's just an unfortunate situation to be in, I guess, and I don't think anything's going to change. And yeah, Max is very much going to be the person to beat, and Checo's not going to be in a position internally where he will be able to beat him. But, it's good that when there are problems on Max's side of the garage, that Checo can come in and take the wins, and it's important for the Constructors' World Championship. And if it comes down to finishing 1-2 in the championship this year, and, it requires a bit of help from from Max. I certainly hope that, this is being naive, that he might actually provide that help instead of denying it back in, like he did back in Brazil, for reasons, if Monaco is the reason. I mean, it's just, yeah, there's like zero grace whatsoever, and that's the thing that's a bit frustrating. So we'll move on from that anyway. Good on Checo for the win. 5 wins in his career now, and getting that redemption like he did, like he needed to from this race last year. George Russell ended up holding off Hamilton, despite Hamilton being on the medium tyre in that second stint, and actually would have probably had the pace to finish on the podium. But, this is George kind of asserting himself, and Hamilton himself having a bit of an interesting weekend. Of course, big news coming out early on that he and his long-time trainer of 7 years, essentially, Angela Cullen, they've split. Toto Wolff kind of alluding that, it was Hamilton who made the call, and, what Lewis wants, Lewis gets kind of thing. And, him also making the comments about whether, he's not going to stand in the way if Lewis decides to leave, if he finds somewhere else finds another team to go to win sooner if they can't get their act together. So, there's a lot to take away from that. The fact that, we've got this whole Red Bull narrative out the front, but Mercedes too at the moment are in a bit of a pickle. And, from those words, is that Wolff just being brutally honest, the fact that it might take longer than Hamilton has left in his career to get back to the front. And, if that's the case, then you feel sorry for George, because he's like, I'm going to be a Mercedes driver and win championships. And, they've kind of gone backwards. Not because of George, of course, but, it's one of those things. Fernando Alonso completing the podium initially, his 100th podium, the Samurai Centurion, as it's known. But after the podium ceremony, when he collected the trophy, we got a 10-second penalty handed down to him for, not serving that 5-second penalty correctly. Same thing that happened to Ocon in Bahrain as well. And that put him off the podium. Now, the reason why they gave him the penalty, they said, because the rear jack was attached to the car, and that constitutes in terms of the regulation about, no work being allowed to be done during the serving of the penalty. That constituted as work being done, even though they just literally put the rear jack on the car and didn't move until the penalty actually was served. So this is where Aston Martin ended up appealing the penalty, got it overturned, and the fact is that the wording kind of needs to change. So if you want to, rather than saying no work is allowed to be done on the car, say nothing is allowed to touch the car during the 5 seconds being served. And the FIA with the Sporting Advisory Committee are going to clarify this ahead of the Australian Grand Prix, so that'll be good. But the fact that there was a delay in issuing that 10-second penalty till after the race, so, the pit stops happen quite early, before the middle of the race, and then also the FIA pretty much, this was the FIA's equivalent of the VAR or whatever that they have in football, the DRS, the decision review system. No, it's not. This is not cricket. Or the bunker, like they have in NRL, making remote decisions based on replays and evidence that they have. Is that while the stewards and the race director on track were kind of satisfied with how the penalty was served, it was the VAR or the remote bunker that kind of came back and said, oh no, that this had happened, and it took them that long to get the information out there, and then for that to be U-turned upon as well is not a good look for F1. So they really need to sort out this stuff. And again, the FIA coming into question with the way that they're governing penalties and whatnot. It's pretty sad. So while we've got this whole narrative of Red Bull, Mercedes as well potentially, and then this was kind of the big furor point after the race too, because it potentially could have cost Alonso A penalty, not a penalty, another podium, which he took at the end, and it's his 100th podium in F1. So good on you, Fernando. Ferrari, their hard tyre pace was rubbish again, ended up 6th and 7th, and what do you say about them at the moment? I have no idea. We'll wait until the next race. Alpines both in the points as well, which was good for them. Esteban Ocon ahead of Pierre Gasly, 8th and ninth. Magnussen coming home in 10th to get some points for Haas and put them on the board, which was excellent. Oscar Piastri was a standout in qualifying, I think, in getting himself into Q3 for the first time. And then the race being ruined for both of the McLarens with front wing damage on the first lap, I should say. And yeah, they pretty much just, rolled around the lower ends of the grid, fighting the likes of Logan Sargent and Nick De Vries, and it was kind of embarrassing, really, again, for McLaren. And there was a moment later in the race where they let both their drivers fight each other, and Oscar kind of got the spoils on this end, on this occasion. But really, when you're fighting for 15th, 16th or 17th, it's not, there's nothing to be gained from that, particularly for a team that was third in the Constructors not too long ago. And there was big news coming out after Saudi and just in recent days about a restructuring of their technical team as well, with James Key actually out now. So it was quite, inconspicuous, the lack of James Key being present during the pre-season and then even the launch of the car. He had some quotes that eventually came out, but I guess it was probably known to the team long before the car hit the track that, things are not really working, which is kind of sad, given that Key was so highly renowned and, even thought of as being a successor to Adrian Newey at some point as well. But what's interesting and possibly concerning is the fact that McLaren are returning to the old matrix style of management, with having multiple figures within the same role, really. So a multi-pronged technical structure involving Peter Prodromou, of course, another ex-Red Bull staff member high up, and then, of course, they're recruiting of Dave Sanchez from Ferrari as well. So he essentially goes into that technical director role, but while he's still on gardening leave from Ferrari, it's not going to be until he's in. So, with McLaren pretty much saying that they've got the target 2025 is when they're going to be winning races and whatnot. We're not that long away from that now, and we've just seen them go backwards once they've come into this new era of regulation. So I guess there are some alarm bells being rung, and if this doesn't work out either, then what do you say of the upper management? Do you start asking questions about Zach Brown? I know there's some criticism out there of Brown and the fact that, he seems to be focusing on trying to get McLaren into any championship that he can throughout the world. They're in IndyCar, they're in Extreme E, they're in Formula E now as well after taking over that Mercedes project. So, why not focus on trying to get McLaren F1 back to being, one of the best teams on the grid, rather than focusing on, expanding the business and whatnot. So that's a big criticism, I guess, that people have had, and it's only going to be more accentuated by the fact if they can't meet those goals that they have for 2025. And like I said last time too, there is a very kind of real threat now that Lando Norris might not be with the team long term if McLaren can't get their act together. I mean, he's been as patient as possibly can be, and considering as well that there was an offer from Red Bull not too long ago to go over there, but such is, I guess, his confidence within the team that they can get the job done. But, they've got to repay that faith now as well, because he's given them plenty of results over the years, and it'll be down to the fact that, they've got to deliver on their part now, which they really haven't in recent times. So, yeah. That pretty much wraps up the F1 side of things, not much to say ahead of next week, so you know how excited I am as always about the Australian Grand Prix, and I'll have the review for you after the race as well, the week after the race, so we'll talk about more F1 then. Let's talk about supercars though, because the Gen 3 era began for the championship, and I've got to say it was quite underwhelming in terms of the racing, but it was full of controversies. I guess Newcastle was probably not the best circuit to showcase, the overtaking capabilities of these new cars, and the fact that, they're designed to be more raceable, less downforce, and harder to drive. They certainly looked a lot harder to drive, as we saw, in practice and qualifying. They, required a lot more hustle and whatnot, a lot more sliding coming out of the corners. But when you've got a circuit like that's pretty much like Monaco as your season opener, you cannot expect anything spectacular. It was good to see in qualifying that the margins were a lot closer between the Camaro and Mustang, and pretty much those usual suspects, your Triple Eights, your Walkinshaw with Chaz Mostert and Cam Waters, the Erebus boys, Kostecki and Will Brown being up there, so that was good. Horrible start though for DJR, neither Will Davison or Anton De Pasquale qualifying or finishing either race in the top 10. And it's surprising given that they were the homologation team for Ford. So, the fact that they consider it, essentially considered like one of the factory teams, hitting the ground not so well in this new era, it's, a bit concerning. But again, totally different circuit to when they race at Albert Park next week alongside the Formula One grid, and also F2 and F3, which will be there too. A surprise though to see Premier Racing, the Peter Gibberish team, that was kind of bought out. They bought out the old Techno Team Sydney, with top 10 shootout appearances for both Jimmy Golding and Tim Slade. Unfortunately, a result taken away from Tim Slade in the first race with a stuck wheel nut, and then ended up multiple laps off the lead as a result. And then, of course, Golding possibly, he was in fourth and, in with a shot of the podium in race 2. So that was really exciting, but ended up finishing behind Davey Reynolds. And when you look at the top 10 in the championship standings at the moment too, mixed results there. You've got Andre Heimgartner up there in 5th for Brad Jones Racing. Both the Team 18 cars are there, Mark Winterbottom and Scott Pye featuring, and Frosty having a tricky weekend as well. And this is one of the veteran drivers who's, driven many different era of car and has come from, driving those more difficult to drive cars in the mid to late 2000s. And Frosty struggling as well there. Jack LeBrock in the Matt Stone Racing car up there too. So, yeah, it was a real interesting finish to the weekend. But I guess that was kind of not without the fact that we had both the AAA cars disqualified from race 1, a breach of Rule C16.2.1.1, which, pretty much translates to they had a cooling system on the driver's side of the car, which is not allowed. Now, it was the same with, the previous regulations and the previous era of car, that the cooling system, the dry ice, what that was fed into was on the passenger side of the car. So, 888, it was interesting because, they were stripped of essentially a 1-2 finish, Van Gisbergen finishing first and winning clinically ahead of Brock Feeney, and the fact that they also had their appeal thrown out as well in recent days, and the fact that they were furious, as I get Lulu under control here, trying to climb up to new heights is this little munchkin. They were furious too, that the fact that they sought permission and clarification from Adrian Burgess, one of the big bosses at Supercars, ahead of the weekend, about whether this was okay to do on the grounds of driver safety and whatnot, not anything to do with performance. And they seemingly had permission granted from Burgess, and then this ends up happening, that they end up being disqualified. Like, I'd be, pretty furious as well in that respect. So, that again kind of feeds into the whole thing about supercars just being confusing at times, and as a result, we had Cam Waters declared the winner. So Mustang ended up winning the first Gen 3 race, which I don't think we would have said in the preseason given how testing fared. Mostert coming in second, and first podium for Walkinshaw as a Ford team, and of course Brody Kostecki, who was the pole sitter, coming home third. And then Shane kind of did his talking on track, which was the big quote post race in race 2. He overhauled Chaz to win in race 2. He came back from not having a great qualifying again, so the one lap speed of those Triple Eight cars not the best at the moment, but in terms of race trim they are rocket ships. And him coming from 5th, also with 12 lap younger tyres as well, and gave a little bump to Chaz at turn 9. Chaz returned serve at turn 11, but, Shane had the pace, he had the tyre delta, and it was his race to lose from there. Chaz had to settle for second, but, he does lead the championship coming out of Newcastle. And then, of course, as I said earlier, David Reynolds finishing third ahead of Jimmy Golding, which was a great result. And Cam Waters, too, strong in the middle of the race, or strong in the early part of the race, but grazed the wall at turn 9, and I think had to deal with the car being kind of bent from the middle third onwards. But the big controversy, I guess, from the weekend, other than the disqualification for Red Bull, was the fact that Van Gisbergen pretty much stonewalled the media afterwards. He was late to the podium, I think, as well, and then pretty much said to Jess Yates, the Fox presenter, I did my talking on track, and that was it. And he said the same thing in the press conference to Chad Nailon as well. And, it was meant with no disrespect to either of them, as we discovered afterwards, but it wasn't before we had a blasting from Mark Scaife, who, let's talk about Mark Scaife. Multiple champion, 5-time champion of supercars, and has won many a Bathurst 1000 as well. These days he commentates, he's been commentating for a long time alongside Neil Crompton, but also happens to be one of the big board members in the consortium known as Race that took over supercars not too long ago. So Scaife, with all his fingers in all of those pies, jumps on Fox Sports or whatever, who, they pay him a very handsome amount of money, and blasts Van Gisbergen for not being an ambassador of the sport, for, not giving proper responses and whatnot, and being sulky essentially for the disqualification. But that wasn't the full story. The story behind this was the fact that Supercars was supposedly trying to put a gag on any kind of criticism that was being levelled towards Gen 3. And Scaife obviously had a lot to do with Gen 3 as well. So, of course, he's going to try and cover up for any shortcomings and say, you're not allowed to say anything about it unless it's good, which is absolutely rubbish. Now, I could say a lot more, harsher things about this than I am able to in this context or on this platform, but any sort of criticism that they level towards Gen 3 should be taken quite seriously in a constructive way. And this is where Shane is being the ambassador for the sport, because he is the champion. He's a 3-time champion. He's, won a couple of Bathurst 1000s as well. Wouldn't you want to take advice from your best driver? You're arguably your biggest asset in terms of marketability as well, and the following that Shane has at the moment. That, if there are any shortcomings with these Gen 3 cars, which, let's be fair, that they've been maligned for quite some time, whether it was the fact that COVID kind of delayed the development of them and getting the parts that they needed and whatnot, but there's been a lot that's been maligned about Gen 3, and yes, I'm glad that they hit the track and we were able to get some results and, some decent racing, but that shouldn't be it. There should be a platform for them to build upon, and for the drivers to have their input and to be able to take them in a better direction. But the fact that supercars want to gag that is absolute rubbish, and this is where I dislike the coverage of supercars as well, to a degree, where the fact that, yes, it's pretty much done all in-house, when it comes to the media as well, the reporting of it is all very linear. I want to see more. I want to see more critics. I want to see more controversy. Like, I loved it, as much as I'm not for News Limited and Fox and all that. They do control quite a fair bit when it comes to the way we get to watch motorsport in this country. I loved it when they had the panel show and they brought on journalists like, as much as, I'm not a fan, but James Phelps and, I love Mark Fogarty, good old Fogs, Bruce Newton, and for them to be able to actually tell us what's going on, speaking the truth rather than this kind of, I don't even know the word to describe it, but kind of just giving us the marshmallow, and sprinkles version of stuff, it's not enjoyable. Like, I love with F1 we've got such a variety of outlets to get our information from, but supercars, it is very much the same sources, and some in particular are pretty much just writing at the behest of supercars and being like, cool, this is the narrative, it's all cool, it's all good. I want to see more of the criticism and whatnot, because that's what the media should be. The fourth estate essentially should be telling all sides, and that's why you got the fifth estate, which is kind of like what we do as content creators and podcasters and whatnot, to be able to share our opinions, because sometimes the opinions and the facts, or like not the facts but the opinions and whatnot coming from the fourth estate are just not good enough. So I don't know, like, I could be wrong here and everything. Don't take it too seriously, of course. I'm just using this as a platform to share what I think, and I just thought it was absolute BS the way that supercars tried to gag Van Gisbergen and also Reynolds as well, David Reynolds, for his criticism. And they're just trying to be constructive. They're, at the end of the day, they're the ones hopping in the car and putting their lives on the line as well and going out there and give us entertainment. So, if they've got anything to say, you've got to listen to them rather than, telling them to shut up, particularly for someone like Scaife, who, is Scaife really relevant these days? Like, he's got the achievements, he's got the, results in the book, but he is very, very much one of those people who you want to hear the opposite side of his opinions sometimes, because it's his opinions that are shoved down our throat, and it's very much in the vein of Fox and News Corp and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, before getting into a big rant and going down the path of criticizing media and whatnot, I think it's time to call it. So thank you very much for tuning in this week. Be sure to check out my work on theraw.com, available through the link in the Linktree. Make sure you follow me on Instagram as well, because that's probably where I'll share a lot of my photos and whatnot from the AusGP weekend. And hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see you next time.